Almost every bladesmith ruins their first knife. Not because they don't work hard and not because they don't have the right tools, but most of the time it's because of a few mistakes that nearly every beginner makes without realizing it. If you're just getting into bladesmithing, avoiding these mistakes can save you a lot of frustration and a lot of ruined blades. Let's start with one of the biggest ones, overheating the steel. When you're new to forging, it's tempting to crank the forge as hot as possible. After all, hotter steel is easier to move with a hammer. But if the steel gets too hot, the grain structure inside the metal starts to grow, and large grain structure makes blades brittle and weak. In extreme cases, you can even burn the steel. When that happens, the blade is basically ruined. Good forging temperatures are usually around a bright orange or yellow heat, not a blinding white. If the steel is throwing sparks in the forge, it's already too hot. Keeping your temperatures under control is one of the first skills every bladesmith needs to learn. The second mistake is grinding the blade too thin before heat treat. When beginners start grinding their knives, they often try to get the blade almost finished before heat treatment. It makes sense. After all, it's easier to grind before the steel hardens. But if the edge gets too thin before quenching, it can warp, crack, or even completely burn during heat treatment. A good rule of thumb is to leave the edge about the thickness of a dime before heat treating. After the blade is hardened and tempered, that's when you bring the edge down to its final thickness. The third mistake is skipping normalization. Normalization is one of the most overlooked steps in bladesmithing. After forging, the steel's internal structure can be uneven from all the heating and hammering. Normalization fixes that. It involves heating the blade to a specific temperature and letting it air cool, usually repeating the process a few times. This refines the grain and relieves internal stress in the steel. Skipping this step can lead to unpredictable results during heat treatment. Blades might warp, crack, or end up weaker than they should be. The fourth mistake is using the wrong quench oil. A lot of beginners just grab whatever oil they have lying around. Motor oil, vegetable oil, even old fryer oil. While some oils can work in a pinch, different steels are designed to quench at different speeds. If the oil cools the steel too slowly, the blade might not harden properly. If it cools too quickly, the blade could crack. So that's why many bladesmiths use commercial quench oils designed specifically for heat treating steel. Even something like preheated canola oil can work better than random used motor oil. The key is understanding what your steel actually needs. And that brings us to another big mistake: not knowing what steel you're using. Beginner bladesmiths often start with mystery steel, scrap metal they found in a garage or scrap yard. Old springs, files, and saw blades can sometimes make great knives, but the problem is you don't actually know the composition of that steel. Without knowing the steel type, it's almost impossible to dial in the perfect heat treatment. For beginners, using known steels like 1084 or 5160 can make the learning process much easier. When you know what steel you're working with, you can follow proper heat treating guidelines and get much more consistent results. And finally, one of the most common mistakes beginners make is focusing on the wrong thing. A lot of new bladesmiths obsess over steel type. They want the best steel possible. But in reality, steel choice matters far less than two other things: heat treatment and blade geometry. A simple carbon steel knife with good heat treatment and thin edge geometry will outperform a poorly designed blade made from expensive super steel almost every time. In bladesmithing, the fundamentals matter far more than the materials. So if you're just starting out, don't worry about making the perfect knife. Focus on learning temperature control. Practice forging clean shapes. Learn how heat treatment works. Every bladesmith ruins a few blades while learning. That's just part of the process. But every mistake teaches you something new about the steel. And eventually, that glowing bar of metal in the forge starts turning into something much better than your first knife ever was.